Most female entrepreneurs think burnout happens because they're not working smart enough, not hustling hard enough, not optimizing enough. But nearly 60% of professional women report burnout as a primary barrier to their performance, and the research ties it directly to blurred limits and unrealistic workloads, not lack of effort. You're already working hard, that's not the problem. The real cost isn't just exhaustion, it's strategic drift, where you're so deep in execution you've stopped thinking about direction. It's bottleneck decisions where nothing moves without you. It's a business that structurally cannot run without you in the room, and that's not a business you own, that's a job you can't quit. Here's the counterintuitive part. Your business isn't breaking because of your workload, it's breaking because there's no system protecting you from it. A boundary isn't a self-care luxury, it's the architecture that makes sustainable growth possible, and right now you probably don't have one. In the next 15 minutes, I want to give you a CEO level framework for building that system, one that protects your energy and your company's ability to grow without you becoming the ceiling. Why saying no feels impossible, and why that's not your fault. Let me start with the part nobody talks about honestly, which is why saying no feels physically uncomfortable, even when you know it's the right call. This isn't a personality flaw, it's behavioral conditioning. Women are socially rewarded for being agreeable, accommodating, and responsive to others' needs. Over time, agreeableness gets wired to something deeper than habit. It gets associated with safety, with being liked, with avoiding conflict. So when a request comes in and you consider declining it, your nervous system doesn't register it as a simple scheduling decision. It registers it as a social threat. The discomfort you feel isn't weakness. It's a learned response doing exactly what it was trained to do. There's a specific pattern in psychology called self-silencing, and it shows up constantly in high-achieving women. It's the tendency to minimize your own needs, suppress your preferences, and avoid direct disagreement to preserve connection or sidestep conflict. In practice, it looks like overcommitting to things you don't have capacity for. It looks like saying yes on Monday and resenting it by Wednesday. It looks like agreeing first and figuring out the consequences later. Now layer that onto the reality of running a business, specifically the reality that 42% of women entrepreneurs are solopreneurs. There's no team to absorb the overflow. No one else picks up what you drop.
Every yes you give is paid for directly out of your own time, your own energy, your own capacity to think clearly.
The cost of self-silencing isn't abstract when you're the only resource your business has. And here's where the guilt loop gets really sneaky. Most people assume guilt shows up after they've said yes too many times and burned out. But it doesn't work that way. The guilt appears the moment you consider saying no, before you've even opened your mouth. That preemptive guilt is what makes the automatic yes feel like the easier choice, because at least it makes the guilt stop. I recognized this in a client a few years ago. She was talented, genuinely generous, and chronically overwhelmed. Every time she considered pushing back on a client request or protecting her own time, she'd describe this wave of discomfort, this feeling that she was being selfish. But what she was actually doing every time she said yes without capacity was abandoning herself to manage someone else's expectations. That's not generosity, that's self-erasure dressed up as professionalism. What I want you to hear clearly is this: the pattern is learned, and what's learned can be unlearned. This isn't who you are, it's what you were taught, and we can work with that. The real business cost of missing boundaries. Here's where I need to shift the conversation, because boundaries are almost always framed as a personal wellness topic, something you do to feel better, something you earn after you've pushed too hard for too long. And that framing is part of why so many founders never build them into their business at all. A 2023 Harvard Business Review study found that teams with clear expectations around availability, workload limits, and protected time showed higher creativity and stronger long-term productivity. Not just happier employees, better output. That means the absence of boundaries isn't just a personal cost you absorb quietly. It's a measurable drag on your company's results. So let's talk about what it's actually costing you. The most visible cost is the bottleneck problem. When you say yes to everything, when you're available for every question, every decision, every emotional fire that breaks out in your business, you're training the people around you to route everything through you. Clients learn that you'll always make exceptions. Team members learn that escalating to you is faster than figuring it out themselves. And slowly, without anyone intending it, you become the single point of failure in your own company. Nothing moves without your sign-off. Nothing resolves without your input. You don't have a business at that point. You have a system that's entirely dependent on one person who's running out of bandwidth. This is the CEO versus doer trap, and it's where most female founders quietly stall. There's a moment in every growing business when the founder has to stop solving problems and start designing systems that solve problems. That transition requires time you can only get by protecting it. It requires mental space you can only access when you're not constantly on call. If you never draw that line, you stay locked in execution mode indefinitely, and the business is capped at whatever you personally can carry. For solopreneurs, the math gets even harder. When founder time is the only resource, poor boundaries don't just create burnout. They kill scale. They limit your ability to bring on clients, raise prices, build repeatable processes, and eventually exit on your terms. Every hour spent absorbing things that didn't need to land on you is an hour that didn't go toward building something that outlasts you. But there's a cost nobody mentions, and it's the one that does the most long-term damage. Chronic overfunctioning changes how you think. When you're constantly in reactive mode, absorbing more than your share, running on fumes, your risk tolerance drops. You stop making bold decisions because you don't have the cognitive reserves to evaluate them properly. Your creativity shrinks because creative thinking requires a brain that isn't perpetually in triage. And your resilience erodes so that things that would have rolled off you a year ago now knock you sideways for days. I worked with a client who built a genuinely good business. Strong market, real demand, a product that worked. But her revenue had plateaued for 18 months straight, and she couldn't figure out why. When we mapped out where her time actually went, the answer was obvious. She was absorbing every client escalation personally, approving every piece of work before it went out, responding to messages at 10 at night, never protecting a single hour for strategy. The market hadn't dried up. She had just become the ceiling because she'd never built a system that could operate above her capacity. That's the real cost, not just feeling tired, becoming the thing that limits how far your business can go. The boundary blueprint, a CEO level framework. So let's build the actual system, not the motivational version where you just say no more often. The structural version that works when you're under pressure, when the guilt shows up, when someone is waiting on you for an answer. There are 3 domains where female founders need explicit boundaries, and most people only ever think about one of them. The first is time and attention. This is the most visible domain, so I'll keep it tight. You need non-negotiable blocks in your week for strategy and deep work, time that doesn't get surrendered to whoever shows up with the most urgent request. That means defining when you're available for communication and when you're not. It means deciding in advance, not in the moment, what gets your attention and what gets routed somewhere else. The default in most businesses is that the founder is available until proven otherwise. You need to flip that. Protected time is the assumption, interruption is the exception that has to earn its way in. The second domain is decision rights, and this one is where most founders leave the most money on the table. Right now, I want you to think about how many decisions land on you every week that genuinely require your judgment versus how many just land on you because no one else has been told they're allowed to handle them. Those are very different problems. The first category, fine, those are yours. The second category is a structural failure, and the fix isn't working harder. It's making a list, an actual written list, of what only you decide and what your team, your clients, or your systems handle without you. Once that list exists and people can see it, a huge amount of overflow stops reaching you entirely because the answer is already clear. The third domain is the one most business advice skips entirely: emotional and relational limits. Choosing not to work with a client who drains you isn't a preference. It's a boundary, and it belongs inside your business model the same way pricing does. Working with people who consistently push past your limits, demand constant reassurance, or treat your time as infinitely flexible is not a client relationship problem. It's a structural problem you're allowing to continue. The same applies to investors, partners, and collaborators. The people you work with are a choice, and that choice either protects your capacity or erodes it. Now, here's a language shift that sounds small but changes the dynamic completely. Stop saying I can't, start saying I don't, or that doesn't work for me. The difference isn't politeness, it's identity. I can't take calls on Fridays sounds like a limitation, something external stopping you, something negotiable if the other person pushes hard enough. I don't take calls on Fridays sounds like a decision. It signals that this is how you operate, not a temporary constraint. People negotiate with limitations. They adjust to decisions. Start with one boundary in the next 48 hours, not your biggest one. Pick something low stakes, a communication window, a response time expectation, a meeting you stop attending. The goal right now isn't to overhaul your entire operation. It's to build what I call the refusal muscle, because the time to practice holding a boundary is not in the middle of a high-pressure client conversation. It's before you ever get there. And yes, some people will call you difficult when you do this. Some will push back, act confused, or make you feel like you're being unreasonable. That discomfort is real, and it's also the price of the transition from doer to CEO. The two roles don't cost the same thing, and boundaries are part of what you pay. So you've set the boundary, and now the guilt has arrived, right on schedule. Here's what I want you to understand about that feeling. It doesn't mean you did something wrong. It means the old pattern is being interrupted. Your nervous system learned for years that agreeableness equals safety. So when you break that pattern, it sends up a signal. That signal is uncomfortable, and it's also completely normal. The goal isn't to eliminate the guilt. It's to stop letting it make your decisions for you. There's a specific cognitive distortion that drives this, and once you can name it, it loses some of its power. It's the belief that maintaining other people's comfort is your personal responsibility. That if someone is disappointed, inconvenienced, or frustrated by your boundary, that's a problem you caused and therefore need to fix. CBT calls this a distortion because it's not accurate. Other people's reactions to your limits are their emotional work to do, not yours. You can be kind in how you communicate a boundary without being responsible for how someone receives it. One of the most practical tools I've seen work consistently is the delay tactic, and it's not avoidance, it's a structured pause. When a request comes in and you feel the automatic yes forming before you've even thought it through, try this instead. Let me think about that and come back to you. That's it. That sentence breaks the reflex. It gives you space to actually evaluate the request against your capacity rather than against your discomfort with disappointing someone. Most people don't realize the automatic yes is a panic response, not a decision. The delay converts it back into a decision. Now, consistency. This is where most founders stall after the first attempt. A boundary you communicate once and then quietly abandon the second time pressure arrives isn't a boundary, it's a suggestion, and people will treat it exactly that way. If you say you don't respond to messages after 6 and then you respond at 9 because the anxiety of not responding feels worse than responding, you've taught the other person that persistence works. The boundary holds when you hold it, especially under the moments when it's hardest. That's not stubbornness, that's how boundaries actually function. Every time you hold a limit when the guilt is loud, when someone is clearly frustrated, when the easier thing would be to just say yes and deal with the fallout later, you're building something. You're building the stress tolerance and decision-making capacity that running a sustainable business actually requires. Resilience isn't built in the easy moments, it's built in exactly these ones. And I want to leave you with this reframe because it changes how the whole thing feels. You are not protecting yourself from your business. You are protecting your business from the version of you that has nothing left to give. The founder who's depleted, reactive, and making decisions from exhaustion isn't protecting anyone. The founder who's protected enough to think clearly, lead deliberately, and show up with full capacity is worth far more to her clients, her team, and her company's future. Boundaries aren't what slow your business down. They're what make it possible to keep going at the pace you're asking of yourself. So here's your challenge this week. Pick one boundary, write it down, tell one person, and hold it even when the discomfort shows up. That's where the change starts, not in motivation, but in the moment you actually hold the line. If this resonated, I hope you watch the next video because it goes deeper into the perfectionism patterns that make boundary setting feel dangerous for high-achieving women. It's a direct continuation of everything we just covered, and it's worth your time.